You are listening to Chthonia, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. Chthonia's logo was designed by J.R. Malpair. Background music is Phantasm by Kevin MacLeod. Hello, and welcome to the Chthonia podcast, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. My name is Breege Burke. I'm your host, and let me fix my microphone here. I had battery failure this morning, so I have to make sure that I have everything set up right. Today we're going to continue the matrika series, and we are going to talk about Brahmi or Brahmini, as she's sometimes known. And this particular goddess is the shakti of the god Brahma, the creator god of the universe. Now, Brahmi is one of those goddesses that she doesn't have really a whole lot of story associated with her. She is, like I said, she is mentioned like the other matrikas in the Chandi Path, but she is not, but there's no particular, say, Vedic story or in them the Puranas that they give any kind of account of Brahmi as an individual. She tends to be worshipped as one of the matrikas, as a group, rather than having a particular temple to Brahmi, for example, on her own. I think there is maybe one example of a Brahmi temple, or a temple where she is at least installed as a kind of deity, and I believe they say the image is in a cave. But generally speaking, her role is to be the shakti of Brahma. Now, as is true with the other the matrikas, she's not the spouse of Brahma. Saraswati is the spouse of Brahma. Now that said, Brahmi as a shakti is also associated with learning, with wisdom, with education, so that actually makes her akin to Saraswati. So even though she's not technically his wife, those qualities of learning are definitely part of Brahmi's nature, and one of the reasons in which a person might appeal to her or might, magically, people who practice tantric magic might actually appeal to her for help with, say, a creative project or schooling or something to do with education or something like that. Okay. Because there's no real set mythology connected to Brahmi other than the fact that she is a shakti, what I want to do is, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to mention her iconography, how she's described. I'm going to read to you the very small piece in the Chandi Path that refers to her, and then we're going to look at some of her different attributes and what they mean in the manner of amplifying them. That's a very Jungian term if you're not familiar with it. Amplification means taking a particular symbol that appears, and usually in a therapeutic sense that would mean, if you had a dream about a white car, okay, well, there's the amplification process. Okay, so what does white symbolize? What do cars symbolize? In more general terms, what do they symbolize to you? Do they have any kind of particular association that you have with them, or a particular incident or feeling that you have with them? And then you kind of move outward to the idea of driving. Okay, you're going somewhere, you're on a journey. Whiteness, okay, well that has to do with perhaps ideas of purification or light or release, or so you know what I mean. That's what we call amplification. Amplification allows you to kind of explode in a way the symbol to see what else is what other associations might be relevant. Now obviously we're not doing this in a therapeutic context, but if we want to look back, if we want to kind of get a sense of the complexity of the shakti and what kind of powers or siddhis that she represents, or what kind of what kind of force she brings to bear, what aspect of pure consciousness or pure energy that she represents. There's like with the other matrikas as well. There's a sense that we have different there's different qualities that they have, and each of those qualities come to bear usually in a singular sense. Like I said, when these matrikas attack, they are attacking as a group, but they're dealing with different aspects and different things, just as we have different vices and we have different the Ashuras who approach represent different kinds of conflicts or struggles. The way that the shaktis respond, or the matrikas, is usually a counter to that particular, whatever that particular difficulty is, vice, struggle, conflict, or thought. So, okay. So let's talk about her iconography first. So I'm gonna read this to you. This says that she is depicted yellow in color and with 4 heads. By the way, Brahma has 4 heads, so this, of course, shows her as being kind of the female aspect of Brahma. She may be depicted with 4 or 6 arms. Like Brahma, she holds a rosary or a noose and a kamandalu, which is a water pot. Okay, if you do puja, you know that there's a very specially kind of shaped water pot that kind of flutes upwards, and then there's kind of a curved mouth to it that comes over. I have one that's brass, but they could be made out of other materials as well. She also may have a lotus stalk or bells, Vedas, and trident, and is seated on a hamsa, which is usually identified with a swan or a goose. And I think in the Chandi, she's usually seen as riding on a swan as her vahana or mount. She's also seated on a lotus with the hamsa on her banner. She wears various ornaments and is distinguished by her basket-shaped crown called Karanda Mukuta. She is shown riding a white swan, as here, Vahana. Okay, so there must have been an illustration of her. Now, there's a few things here that we want to talk about then. And now let me read to you from Chandi very quickly, because this also fits in. Now, in the similar scene that I was reading to in the last couple episodes, there is the, here's where the matrikas come in. Kali is attacking the demons with her pike, and then it says, Kamandalu, Jalaksepa, Hata Viran, Hatojasa, Brahmani, okay, let's Chakarokatrun, Yena Sma Davati. Okay, I'm not sure I'm accenting that correctly because I'm sort of reading this straight up from the book. Creative energy is how she is described. Brahmani is described as creative energy here. That's how it's translated. And it says, creative energy sprinkled water from her begging bowl. Now, they're calling it a begging bowl rather than, they're calling the kamandalu as a begging bowl, but it's actually a water pot. On a group of thoughts, and on whomever the water fell, his vitality and valor were destroyed. Now, okay, that's interesting. First of all, she's described as the Shakti of creative energy, and she fights demons by pouring water on them, okay? And they're calling it, rather than the sort of ritual pot, they're referring to it as a begging bowl. And that may also be meaningful here in the sense of, the beggar is one who may be empty. You know what I mean? When we tend to be, in the Eastern sense, when we talk about emptiness, we're talking about that state of where we don't attach ourselves to anything. So in a sense, the beggar bowl can represent that kind of non-attachment. Okay. And the water is one of the big motifs that we want to look at here. Pouring water on this troop of thoughts and demons in order to destroy their vitality. Now, because we think of water as kind of a life-giving thing. So we want to kind of amplify the idea of water. We also want to think about the fact that she's associated with the color yellow. If you recall in the Mahavidya podcasts, when we talked about Bagalamukhi is also the crane goddess. So, well, she doesn't actually look like a crane, but the name means, Bagalan means crane. She also is associated with the color yellow. Yellow is associated with Vishnu, but also with Brahma, okay? And that may be a solar reference, okay, but there is a few other associations with yellow. And the fact that she's also got the rosary, they said regardless of how she's depicted, she always has that water pot or begging bowl or whatever you want to call it, and a rosary. which are very orthodox Brahmin kind of ritual items. Okay, so they have to do with reciting mantra. I mean, that's what you use your rosary for, or your mala, is you use it to count and recite your mantra. And here she is. We see her with her rosary and her water pot, and using the water pot to destroy demons. Now, so this is sort of in a way she's using it as an act of violence. So using these religious symbols in an act of violence, okay, towards the Asuras, which is which also could be loaded with connotation. Okay. Now, remember we had said that the matrikas each have to do with a vice, and in this case, and this is the other aspect of her that I'm going to want to talk about, that she personifies the vice of pride. Okay, so Brahmi has to do with pride. And so the question is like, oh, that's interesting. Now, one obvious thing, and it's mentioned in the Ferocious book, it says that Brahma himself, while he's not arrogant, he does portray this kind of haughtiness from time to time, as they describe it, like, the old Brahmin grandfather who acts like he, who maybe justifiably in a way acts like he knows it, or knows it all. So Brahma can have this. There's one notable scene where he argues with Vishnu and Shiva about who's the greatest of the three of them, because they are the Tridevas. They are the three: the creator, the preserver, and destroyer. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Okay. And also her, both Brahma and Brahmi, they have this sense of distance to them. So in this piece from Chandi, she's flying over and she's pouring water on the demons. So she doesn't have a weapon in her hand in the sense of she's not, not shedding blood. Okay, she doesn't get her hands dirty. She doesn't shed blood. She kind of, in a way, stays aloof from everything other than pouring the water. So there's that sense of detachment, and we can also look at that. There are gods that are associated with watching from afar. In particular, the Canaanite god El, who, by the way, is really, they've said, people have kind of traced the origins of Yahweh, say Yahweh is actually, El, the Hebrew version of El. We talked about Yahweh's connection to Baal in terms of being a storm god, but Yahweh is also, in fact, if you read the actual translations, one of my favorite translations of the Bible is the Interpreter's Bible, namely because you have, translations sort of, you've got various translations side by side in one text with all of the annotation. And in the, which Bible, I'm trying to think which one it was. Was it the Anchor Bible? I'm trying to remember now which version it was. It's actually at my office, which I still can't go to because we still have COVID restrictions. We can't go back until, I'm recording this now in late July, in like closer to mid-August we're allowed to go back into our offices. But for right now, I'm still, so I can't go back and pull the book off the shelf and remind myself. But in any case, it's, where the actual translation of the Lord is El. Okay, and think about it, Elohim. Okay, the Elohim is usually a plural in Hebrew, but it makes reference to the Lord and the company of the Lord. Okay, and this aspect of El is portrayed as a god who sits kind of apart in a tent, kind of watching like, war or watching action from a distance, from like a hill. Okay, watching from afar. So that is, and that is actually the quality of godhood in the West. There's a God who is transcendent, who is not part of the world, who stands apart from it. Okay, so there's that aspect of standing apart that we see both in Brahma and in Brahmi. There's the involvement is, they're considered more or less be benevolent gods. But they are observers. They are not as much participators. Now, if we think about this in a Taoist sense, okay, we think about yin energy, which is the feminine energy. Yin energy, one of its qualities is passivity. Okay, we think of the yang force as being, if you do I Ching and you or read Taoist texts, the yang energy is active. Okay. That's the method of doing. If you follow Thelemite, I guess you could call it a mythology, you have Nuit, who stands for the passive energy, and then you have Hadit as kind of, the active force, and the combination, then there's the production of Ra or Quit, who is the sort of crowned and conquering child, okay, kind of a Horus figure. So so Hadit becomes the really sort of the active principle there, usually represented by the priest in the Gnostic Mass, and then of course the priestess who represents the more passive element, and yet is the potential and is the sort of the source of that. So in that also we can see a kind of Brahmi kind of connection. Pardon me, I'm drinking my coffee this morning. Okay, so now in terms of the grahas or the planets, Brahmi rules over Jupiter, also known as Brahaspati or Guru. That's the Sanskrit terms for Jupiter. And both of them have to do with wisdom and learning. Okay? When you think about the Guru, Guru really means teacher. Okay, and Brahaspati is another name. Brahaspati is the actual Guru for the gods. There are two. Brahaspati ends up being the Guru for the Devas, and Shukra ends up being, who's Venus, ends up being the Guru for the Asuras. Okay, so they both have gurus, they both have teachers, but Shukra or Venus has to do more with material and sensual life and material abundance, and thus, she is teaching the Asuras those kinds of ways. Whereas Jupiter or Guru, is more about, pure learning, the Vedas, ritual practices, mantras, more of what we traditionally would think of as religious iconography. And so in that sense, there's that association there. So again, when with her holding the water pot and the rosary, you definitely have this idea of kind of almost religious orthodoxy, which is interesting. Okay, so let's talk about some of these symbols. Where do we want to start? So much to choose from, actually, for a goddess who really does not have a whole lot of story behind her. Okay, so let's think about let's talk about the yellow color first. Okay, so if I go back to the symbolism of Bagalamukhi, okay, who was the paralyzer. She's the one who paralyzes the demon, who has the boon that whenever he speaks, the demon is called Madan. Whenever he speaks, he has acquired Vaksiddhi, which means that whatever he says comes true. And so he misuses this, of course, to to be destructive and to be murderous and to trouble humans. So Bagalamukhi basically paralyzes his tongue, okay, and then kills him. Okay, the color yellow here, I'm just reading some associations here. It has to do with the sun, has to do with gold, the earth, grain, and fire. Okay, so here's another. Now that's interesting. It has to do with fire, although her weapon is water, signifying auspiciousness, bountifulness, and purity. The yellow turmeric, because we all know turmeric as the spice is actually a yellow color, is associated with marriage, which is why in case of Bagalamukhi she was known as Pitambara Devi. Okay, so because Pitambara has to do with the color yellow. But we also see Brahmi. So she was one of the Mahavidyas. Now, among the matrikas, we see Brahmi riding her swan and representing the color yellow with her rather orthodox iconography and associations. So, okay, so let's think about, so there's what we, so we can see that kind of reference. You have this idea of growth. And if you think about her as being associated with Jupiter, Jupiter has to do usually, astrologically at least, Jupiter has to do with expansion, okay? You have to do with expanding outwards, again, expanding one's world, expanding one's knowledge of the world, learning, which kind of makes sense, because if you think about Brahma as a creator, and if you think of Brahmi as the creative energy, what does creativity require? It requires that we think differently about things, right? If you're going to create something new, you have to think about it. You have to, put some kind of thought into it, and think outside the box, as they say. When you're being truly innovative and creative, you're making something new. Now, maybe you are copying something that's there, but there still requires a sense of skill, of attention to detail, of dexterity. There's all kinds of things that go into creativity, depending on what kind of creativity you're talking about. Now, I think it's that what's interesting is this association with Saraswati and study and learning. Okay. And this I also feel like the symbolism of the rosary plays into this as well. because the rosary is for chanting mantra. Now, mantra is a sound. Okay, we talked about mantras in the intro to Tantra. There's seed mantras, there's Gayatri mantras, there's the stotra mantras, which are the sort of the how do they describe it? It's basically the Namavali. It's the Om Devye Namaha. It's the I bow to, that kind of a mantra. And that may be made up of deity names, seed mantras, whatever it is. But one of the fundamental ideas, when you talk about the creation of the universe in Hinduism, okay, now first of all, Hinduism, the Rig Veda says that the universe came out of nothing. Okay, those of you who believe that, who keep pointing to Adam and Eve and stories like it as having to do with religious ideas of creation of the world, guess what? In Hinduism, the universe comes out of nothing. So there, okay? In fact, hang on one second. I have the reference to that. I may have read this before, so apologies if I have, but I know I see the book up here on my shelf. And let me find the creation myth. This is a translation, by the way, from a book called Parallel Myths. Here we go. Thoughts of Brahma. Here we go. Creation myths. So, the Rig Veda, when it comes to creation, says, it's called the Nasadiya, or There Was Not. This is a hymn contained in the ancient scriptures, the Rig Veda. Source of this, they said, this particular one came from the textual sources for the study of Hinduism. And so I'll read you this translation. There was neither non-existence nor existence then. There was neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred where? In whose protection? Was there water bottomlessly deep? There was neither death nor immortality then. There was no distinguishing sign of night or day. That one breathed windless by its own impulse. Other than that, there was nothing beyond. Darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning. There was no distinguishing sign. All this was water. Okay, that's actually similar to some other myths. The life force that was covered with emptiness, that one arose through the power of heat. Desire came upon that one in the beginning. That was the first seed of mind. Now, that's similar to the idea of Eros being one of the original forces out of chaos in Greek creationist myth. Poets, seeking in their heart with wisdom, found the bond of existence and non-existence. Their accord was extended across. Was there a below? Was there above? There were seed placers. There were powers. There was impulse beneath. There was giving forth above. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods came afterward with the creation of the universe. Who then knows whence it had arisen? Whence this creation has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows, or perhaps he does not know. Okay, so interesting Vedic hymn there, because the implication there is that, we don't know where the universe came from. And they talk about the idea of kind of light and heat and there's some certain kinds of forces that move things. But they're suggesting that, forces came together and somehow this universe came together, maybe of its own volition, maybe another way. But there's no claim there that God made the universe. Okay? Worlds are created by Brahma. The way that works is usually that Vishnu is sleeping on the ocean of consciousness. A lotus grows out of his navel. Out of that lotus, Brahma arises, and Brahma lives on that. And then, so the lotus opens. There's Brahma through his thoughts creates a world. Okay, and mind you, it's now here's the important part. It's through his thoughts. Okay. Now, how are thoughts expressed? Well, they can be expressed in images, they can be expressed in stories, and they can be expressed, and of course, more fundamentally, in words. Okay, so the idea of the mantra, there's a prayer called the Maheshwara Sutras. Okay, and those are associated with Shiva. Okay, because there is a myth associating Shiva with the formation of language. There's the idea that the world was entirely in silence, and that Shiva is the one who brought the, you have this wonderful singing of this sutra with drums and sounds like thunder and lightning as Shiva brings forth the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, which are recited. And I could recite them for you now. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get one wrong. I could try it. What is it? It's Ayun Ruruk Iu Ayau Chayavaret Lun. This is the part where I jump over. Lun Yaman. I'm going to miss that. Havarat Jabagada Dash Hashasar Tatai Shashasar Ho. Something like that. I'm screwing it up. I'd have to actually have them in front of me to get them all right. But roughly that's sort of the a crappy rendition of the sound of it. So there's the Maheshwara Sutras. And there is, I think Pandit Jasraj has a really wonderful recording of that. I think you can actually download it like through iTunes or find it on the internet. So that's a wonderful thing to listen to like during Shivaratri or even though that's not really the myth conveyed for Shivaratri, it doesn't matter, it's associated with Shiva. So the Maheshwara Sutras. And the implication there is that, life and creation and creative force comes from language. It comes from sound, more fundamentally from sound. That's why, for instance, in meditation, the sound Om is so important. Okay? It represents the fullness of the universe. Ah, oo, and then silence. Okay? There's this sort of, it has to do with this sort of vibration of things as they are. And if you think about it, when you put sounds together, what our lives and what our consciousness is made up of is story. Okay? This, by the way, is why mythology is so important, because when I have students take me, they're like, yeah, right, I get to hear about a bunch of boring friggin' gods from ancient Greece. No, actually, these are stories that are foundational to your whole experience in the world and how you see things. One of the questions that's come up recently is the whole idea of, like after we've had the incidents with George Floyd and the protests and the riots, you're seeing a lot of changes. You're seeing this idea of taking away names and things that are clearly references to things we've taken for granted that are references to actually really horrible things. So, for instance, like the Aunt Jemima brand. It's funny, I opened my cabinet this morning. I'm trying to clear out stuff in my kitchen cabinet, and I'm going, oh my God, I still have Aunt Jemima syrup in there. I'm gonna use it, get rid of that, just use it up. But it's, but the iconography there, the old slave mammy who, makes you these wonderful pancakes, and people actually saying, oh, but that's what gave me a comforting image of black people. Really? Okay. See what I mean? There's a story behind it. All right. And you may say, I don't care. I just, I don't care about the story. Yeah, but the story affects you. That's why branding is so important and why it's significant. The brand, whether or not you are drawn to that brand psychologically, whether the images and the words connected with it draw you in. There's been discussions of old folk songs that we've taken for granted that we learned as kids, and suddenly you realize, hey, wait a minute, these were minstrel songs. These were things that were meant to sort of, these were songs about slavery, or these were songs about black people. They were just, you realize and you go, oh God, I had no idea. You just had no idea what the context was for the story, and most people would argue, oh yeah, well, but that was just, nobody thinks about that now. Well, here's the thing: what you think about it and what it represents are two different things. You don't have to consciously sit here and think, oh wow, this is a song about slavery. Like you don't have to have that conscious thought. The repeating of it is still, there's still a felt subtext there. And, white people may not notice it, but, black people who have some kind of awareness of it certainly do. And it's, and the more you start to see these things in the culture, the more you start to realize, hey, wait a minute, there's this hidden story in our culture. And the whole point is that you want to change the story. This is why the story has to be pointed out, because words are powerful. Okay. And this is why, like, okay, the Washington Redskins, they're changing their name. Okay. Because Redskins is a very offensive reference to Native Americans. And they're planning on changing. People are going, oh, but it's the name of the... No, there's an association there, and there's a story attached to it, which might be a stereotype that, you might just say, yeah, well, it's a stereotype, and stereotypes exist. Well, on one hand, that may be true. On the other hand, when they become the basis for defining people or defining what their rights are or defining their place in society, that's a problem. So you have to be very careful about story. And that's why paying attention to stories, even very old stories, is important. And you want to look for, and even though anthropologists hate it when people look for patterns, they try to say, no, each culture's unique, they have their own thing. Yeah, okay, I'm not discounting or denying that, but by the same token, you do kind of want to look at what are the underlying messages there that we as humans are telling ourselves about life and existence and about how things are and about how people are. Part of the reason I do this podcast is because we're amplifying, we're exploding these things in a way that we can look at what's behind them. Because sometimes the things that you think are, that are either they're alien to you in some way or you have a negative association with them, may not be so negative, and there's also things you may have a positive association with that maybe are not so positive. So you want to be aware of this because that's the only way that you can potentially alter or change that story, or just get rid of it entirely and write a new one. Okay, there's your creative element. So all this has to do with Brahmi. It has to do with language as the basis of creation. Okay, so that is important. Now, okay, so we're talking about that. We've talked about the color yellow. Water. Okay. Pouring water on someone or something. Now we can look at that. Excuse me a moment. I'm trying to avoid, when I have, sometimes I have these things with my breath. I've always had them. It's not anything new. And I don't want to, and sometimes when I breathe funny, I get like a funny tick on the microphone, and I've certainly had enough people in comments tell me about it, so I'm trying to do different things to try to avoid it. I don't think I've been 100% successful, but I'm trying to do better with that. Okay, water. What is water? So if you pour water on somebody, if you think about somebody who's real hot to do something, and then somebody quote unquote pours cold water on you, okay, in one sense that's a dose of reality. Okay, that's a dose of you may have your head in the clouds, you may not be being realistic, so pouring water on you kind of is supposed to kind of wake you up from a dream, as it were. Like you're in a sleep or a stupor, you jump into the shower and the water hits you and now you're awake, right? So there's that aspect of pouring water on something. Now again, there's that fiery reference, but oftentimes pouring water is life-giving, but if water is used in as a means of death. Okay, so how does water kill? Well, through drowning, right? When you drown something, that is a deadly aspect of water. And so what do we think of when we think of drowning? Well, we think of floods. Okay, we might think of floods. We might think of tsunamis or hurricanes, or other kinds of natural disasters which have tremendous amounts of water. I always get scared of when there's a combination of a lot of water and no electricity, because I'm not convinced my backup sump pump works. It seems like every time the power goes out, I hear it beeping like it's not charged up, and I'm like, what the hell? That should have been charged up. I put 2 different batteries in it. Anyway, that's nothing to do with this. But yes, but water, okay, water as a destructive force. And water, as we can see, like I said, if you've lived through hurricanes and things, you know that it can, tear roofs off things and knock trees down. And I mean, that's the wind too, I suppose. But nonetheless, there's like this violent force that can be destructive. So, so you have this idea of, okay, flood mythology. Okay, what happens with the flood? Either depending on which version of the myth you're following. In the more Sumerian and Babylonian versions of the flood myth, it's more like, God, we created all these mortals, there's too many of them, and it's almost like when people you talk about the badger cull or the deer hunt, it's like, yeah, we got to cull them because there's too many of them. So basically, it's I think it's Enki, the god Enki. I always get Enki and Enlil confused in my mind. But in any case, when it says, well, we're going to send this big storm and we're going to wipe humanity out. But of course, there's two, always two humans that are warned. In this case, it was Atrahasis or Utnapishtim. Well, Utnapishtim became his name after he survived the flood. But him and his wife go inside a chest or a boat or something, and then they float for X number of days, and then when the waters settle again, they're left. The Greeks have a version of this myth called Deucalion and Pyrrha and Deucalion, sorry. And in that myth, Zeus is displeased. This is during what Hesiod considered to be the Bronze Age. They all, Zeus thought that people, they weren't properly worshiping the gods. They were corrupt, so more humankind was corrupt. So he decides he's going to wipe humankind out. But Deucalion and Pyrrha, because they're warned by Prometheus, because Deucalion is actually I think he's Prometheus' son, and then Pyrrha is Epimetheus, his brother's daughter. So she's not always Epimetheus is not on the ball, Prometheus is, okay? So Prometheus, anyway, warns them about the coming flood, and so they, again, get in a little chest or a boat, and they survive. Now, after the flood's over, they're standing there in a world where nothing's left. After the waters recede, it's just the two of them, and they're mournful for the loss. So what happens is there's a temple of Themis, the goddess of order, that's still like the remains of a temple. So they go in and they make supplications to Themis, and they said, can you please tell us how we can repopulate the world? And Themis is moved by their prayers and says, throw the bones of your mother behind you. And of course, Pyrrha, who has the more epimethial thinking, kind of goes, I couldn't desecrate my mother's grave, but Deucalion goes, something else. So they're thinking about it. Wait, the mother is the Mother Earth. The rocks would be her bones. So they pick up rocks and start throwing them over their shoulder, and human beings start popping up as they do that. Okay, so that's how the world is repopulated in that version of the myth. The biblical version is the one that everybody knows with Noah and the Ark. Okay, again, that one comes much later than the Babylonian and the other ones. The Greek one might be roughly contemporary, but there's this idea of a flood. Now, in the biblical version, it's because not only is humankind corrupt, but they've mated with angels and created a race of giants. Yeah, I'll bet you missed that in Genesis. Okay, it is in there. And I remember one of my students coming up to me. She's like, I went to Catholic school. I studied, I don't remember this. So I opened up the Bible and I showed her the part, and she just went, holy crud, I'd never thought. She's like, I didn't know that. Yeah, it doesn't tend to be emphasized, because in a world where people try to read the Bible in a very rationalistic sense, which I think is the wrong way to read it. Okay, that's just my opinion. I'm sure there are theologians who will very adamantly disagree with me. I mean, I suppose there's parts of the Bible that you can read rationalistically or meant to be. But people tend to take it too much as like a book handed down by God about how to live. It's like, that's not really quite what it is. So it's, you could get things out of there about how to live, but they're not necessarily stated in the most straightforward way, which is the way story and metaphor and myth work, by the way. They're not direct. Just like if you have a dream, it's not usually there's no voice directly telling you like what your unconscious mind. You have a dream full of weird symbols or people appear and you, what's going on, and then it's like you have to interpret. Okay, so this is why you have oracles. People, they have symbols people interpret. Generally, it's like there's multiple meanings to these things, and they're not that straightforward. So, but floods tend to represent renewal, okay? They tend to mean, and so again, you have this idea of water wiping out corruption, okay? Wiping out and being able to start over, okay? That the drowning of the flood allows for a rebirth of kinds. So you have this element of it as well in Brahmi's pouring of water, and she's pouring it from a holy vessel, from either the beggar's pot. So so again, there's kind of that symbolism there of the way in which thought can get out of control. By the way, I mean it's good, language and words and reading and study is all good. You can get out of control with that too. People, and that's where the vice of pride comes in, because you can become very proud of just how much smarter you are than everybody else. And really what it is that maybe, nobody knows everything. There's always something to be learned. And you can, humility tends to go away if you think that you know too much. So, and like I said, all the book learning in the world does not replace experience. And certainly when it comes to spiritual experience, words don't actually mean anything, because now you're moving into a field that's not about labels, that it's not about separation, that's not about measurement. And I should note in this case, mathematics is also a language, okay? These are all languages that we try to make sense of and understand things, but there are things that are understood that are beyond language too. So that's another thing to consider. It's and that's where, because when we are too attached to that, then we kind of have a sense of pride. It's what Carl Jung meant when he had said that religion gets in the way of a religious experience. Okay, it's the last barrier to religion experience. Your image of God is your last barrier, because you're stuck on the image and you need to let the image go at some point. You have the image to help you connect. At some point, or as my guru would say, it's like the image is like a ladder that you climb. At some point, you get off the ladder, okay? And you move into whatever space you're moving into, okay? But it's not, there's language and there's what's beyond language, okay? So that's where, so that can be the extreme of it. That can be the pride aspect of it. But the water represents, the destructive water can represent the need to cleanse all of that away. And generally the crime that's committed there is one of one of either trying to be as great as the gods or better than the gods. And typically this is what the Asuras are doing. They're trying to make a complete power grab for themselves at the expense of the gods. So, and you need both elements. So you have to be aware that this exercise in purification, I mean, it should bring about a renewal. It just should get rid of that which is no longer helpful or necessary. Okay. Now I'm looking at my time here. I'm thinking I started this podcast about 42 minutes ago, so I probably should wrap up soon. So I just want to just see if I have any other notes here that I want to share with you, because we've talked about flood. Water is, sort of the purification, and yeah, I think I've covered all of these things. The passivity, like the standing at a distance, the yellow being associated with abundance and expansion, and the idea of Jupiter or Brahaspati, representing that, and water as kind of a purifying influence of getting rid of that which no longer serves, okay, and getting rid of that which has become corrupted in some fashion. So this is, this is how Brahmi, as the shakti of Brahma, how it operates, okay? There's the creation in the world. There's the need for mantra and language and speech and so forth. But then there's needs to cleanse oneself of that to get what's beyond it, okay? The truth that's beyond it. And that's a truth that's I don't want to say it's impossible to express in words, but it's nearly impossible. It's why you need poetry, okay? We tend to think of everything in a very prosaic way. And that was Campbell's criticism, by the way, of most biblical hermeneutics and theology, was that you're reading the Bible as prose, not as poetry, okay? Because oftentimes it's what's implied, it's not what's directly stated. And that's the thing that we tend to miss, because we tend to analyze things to a point. Our scientific mindset makes us dissect things to the point that, it's like, you've taken the frog and you ripped all its organs out. You don't really have a frog anymore. You just have a bunch of parts, the parts function as a whole, and we tend to think of everything in terms of their separate components rather than letting go of that idea and focusing on working as a whole. That's the emptiness, too, by the way, of the pot, or of the beggar's pot. The idea that you have emptied yourself of the idea that all these separate things have a reality. There's kind of a single reality behind it. It's like saying, I'm a little wave on the ocean and I'm the only, and then let's focus on this wave and then the individual thing of that wave and that wave, when actually each wave by itself is not, the power comes from the force of the ocean as a whole. Okay. So it's this idea of letting go of your little struggles and your little power, and merging yourself with that which is the other, while at the same time recognizing that, you are a facet of that, or that you may have a role to play. It's not that, where the crime typically comes in. And I think actually in Western myth and religion, that's the crime too. The crime of hubris, people say, oh, people thinking that they're better than the gods. Really what that comes down to is thinking that you as the individual by yourself, and by the way, this is a big problem in the U.S. and in U.S. thinking for sure. The idea that you as the individual matter more than the whole. And that's where the problem comes in, because that's when things start to fall apart. Everybody can't, it's John Donne, no man is an island, everybody has to function. You are unique, and you have your own gifts and talents and, authentic things that you bring to the table. And yes, you should be allowed to be a free person to express them, but the only way you can do that is by honoring the whole. Your power comes from the whole. It doesn't come from individual efforts. You know what I mean? Individual efforts are important, but everybody has to make them. And when they don't, and they frequently don't, that's when you kind of have this division and this kind of struggle. So the whole is as important as, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Let's put it that way. So on that note, I think I'm going to end for this particular episode. And I would like to remind you to please subscribe if you are on YouTube, and press the bell notification to get to the Chthonia channel if you want to get notified about when new podcasts come out, which are roughly every couple of weeks, and I sometimes have new videos. If you'd like to support my work, patreon.com/Chthonia. I have that. I try to do more frequent updates. Time really gets away from me, so I probably don't update people as often as I think I should. And I want to have some more special videos and things for Patreon subscribers, so I'm kind of working on what I can do there. You can also read about the other work that I do, both academic and fictional works that I have that are basically connected to this theme. And I also have a site called liminalreiki.com, where I do both Reiki and I use tarot and other systems as kind of a holistic thing. Again, symbolic interpretation. Let's see what's going on with somebody. Sometimes I use astrological charts. I use different things to help a person see what's going on with them, that maybe they have a hard time identifying. Maybe they're in the gap between things. And I use Reiki as a rebalancing tool. And I've actually mastered a distance Reiki technique, which I can do over Zoom, because we're still in COVID time. It's still somewhat risky, especially for somebody like me, working independently, to bring people into my house to do it. I would eventually like to go back to doing that again. But I can also do a distance Reiki that can help with specific problems, and also help with that rebalancing. And I've done tests on it, and it does have an effect. It does have a positive effect. And if you go to liminalreiki.com to the testimonials page, you can see feedback on how people feel about both my readings and the Reiki sessions. So there's that, and so you'll be hearing more about that. And I'm hoping to do. I haven't been inspired to do a liminal tarot video recently, but hopefully I will do another one again soon. And that's about it for me for now. Social media, subscribe to Chthonia Podcast, 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Twitter and Instagram. And, and I thank all of you who listen and who continue to listen and continue to support, and all of you who have, started following me on Twitter and in different places and have retweeted and promoted different things. I thank you very much, and hope to see you all at the next episode.